Dadhood. Modern Dadhood podcast.
All right, let's make a holiday episode.
You want to make this a holiday episode? Cue the jingle bells.
Well, this is Modern Dadhood, an ongoing conversation about the joys, the challenges, and the general insanity of being a dad in this moment. My name's Adam Flaherty, and I am a dad to two daughters who are right on the verge of 11 years old and 8 years old. Mark, it freaks me out. Who are you?
Hi, my name's Mark Checkett. I'm a dad to twin boys who will be turning 7 quite soon. When we were going into 6 from 5, it didn't feel like quite as much of a leap as, for some reason, 6 to 7 feels. 7 just sounds like they're getting to be big boys.
Sure are. Young men. Hey, we got a great episode. A guest is one of the very best, in my opinion.
My opinion as well.
Children's authors and illustrators. This guy does both the writing and the illustrating. His name's Chris Van Dusen. He lives in my home state of Maine, and he has just really risen to the top in terms of children's literature. So we'll share that conversation with Chris Van Dusen very, very soon. But Mark, I wanted to give you the opportunity to quickly let listeners know, especially new listeners, what they can expect from this podcast, Modern Dadhood. Can you give them like the, 15-second version?
15? You're out of your mind.
Well, you don't have to go super fast. It's just filtering it down to the most important bullets.
Here's the most important bullets. Adam and I are just a couple of dinks.
8 seconds.
Are you? I knew that was coming. Who have a lot of fantastic, wonderful, diverse, brilliant, funny guests on our show to explore the topic of fatherhood. And we learn a lot about being a dad and experiences with fatherhood. How about some stats, huh? We're on all the major platforms at moderndadhood.com. If you want to go there and check out our episode back catalog.
And we would ask that if you like what you're hearing, please, subscribe to the podcast, give us a quick review wherever you're listening. And probably most importantly, just tell a friend about the show. Tell a friend, turn somebody else onto the podcast. That would be the best Christmas holiday gift that you could give us if you're interested in giving us a gift.
What should we talk about, dude?
Here's what's on my mind. My girls love reading Christmas books this time of year. Yeah. And we happen to have 3 different copies of Twas the Night Before Christmas by Clement Moore.
Interesting.
Moore or Moore?
Moore.
I've always pronounced that last name Moore, like because there's 2 O's. But a number of years ago, I got scolded by my wife and some other friends who were there at the time. And they said, no, it's just pronounced more. Like the opposite of less is more.
Do it one more time, both ways.
Clement Moore.
Okay, now do it the other way.
Clement C. Moore.
You can't change. You can't throw in a middle initial. It sounded so similar
they're
to
the
me.
same. It's the same. So anyway,
got that.
My 10-year-old, almost 11, we were noting that different, I don't know if you want to call them authors because they're really just taking Clement's work and repurposing it.
Yeah.
Sometimes they changed some of the words.
I don't like that. I'm coming straight out of the gate with I don't like that.
I suppose that the work itself is old enough that it's in the public domain so that so that anybody can take that and republish it and pair it with, whatever artwork they like. But if it's in the public domain, you have every right to modify it.
But why? Why are you doing that? Like, okay, here are the criteria for me. If you're gonna take something like that and modify it, 1, the original text is problematic by today's standards, but it has to be like really problematic by today's standards, right? Language, vernacular, terminology. Yeah. I mean, just stuff that we just, we know now we don't say because we're smarter now.
Inappropriate or unacceptable for some reason.
Totally. And 2, is if you are taking something and you're utilizing sort of like an artistic license to create your reimagined version of the thing. Right?
Sure.
And I think that that's sort of okay. I mean, I hope that you do something interesting with that. I hope that you truly do reimagine it,
Yeah. But you're saying if there's nothing offensive, inappropriate in there, if it's going to be 95% the same as the original, you better make it 100%.
Yeah, just make it 100%. Like, what are you even doing? Why bother change anything?
How dare you?
What's wrong with you? Get out. Get out of here.
So that's what we were doing tonight before the recording was comparing and contrasting different versions of 'Twas the Night Before Christmas.
Interesting. And I do love 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, the original text. Just this year, one of my sons was, he grabbed the book and he started reading it himself, which is like, that's new this year. Like last year, we would have had to read it to him.
As he was reading, was his droll little mouth wrapped up like a wreath?
It sure was. It sure was. It really did. It really hit me in the feels, like listening to him read that. Something about that book, that story, this time of year.
Seeing your son's head encircled in smoke like a wreath.
Yeah, for sure. That's part of it. I absolutely loved it. And it was funny because there's words in there that he'd never seen before. And he was taking all of the time in the world. And it was getting later and later. But it was so worth it. It was a real test of patience.
Yeah.
Which is sometimes really hard for me. But I loved every second of it. It was wonderful.
All right. What do you say?
I say, what the hell are we waiting for?
All right. Let's get on with the show.
Chris Van Dusen is an author and an illustrator living on the coast of Maine. He's a dad to 2 grown sons. He's written 11 books, illustrated even more, and some of them are probably on our listeners' bookshelves right now. Chris, welcome to Modern Dadhood.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for taking the time.
Sure.
We love to start out just by asking our guests about their family, about their fatherhood experience. So you've got 2 grown sons. What is dadhood like for you these days?
Sure. My oldest son, Ethan, he is 33. He lives in Ventura, California. He moved out there to take a job at Patagonia, which is headquartered in Ventura. And he's newly engaged. We are very excited about that. We love his fiancée, and we can't wait to have a wedding early next year. So we're very excited about that. My younger son, Tucker, has probably the best job in the world. He works for LL Bean, and he drives the LL Bean bootmobile around.
Oh, is that right?
Get out of here. That's cool.
Yeah, and if you don't know what the bootmobile is, you should Google it, because it's kind of like the Wienermobile, but instead of a giant hot dog, it's a giant bean boot that he has to drive around. And he's currently right now in Indianapolis at a new store opening, and he goes around and he works for the marketing department, and they do all sorts of events. But the biggest selling point is that the bootmobile in itself, because it's such a draw. He tells great stories about driving down the highway and people pulling over in front of him and taping him, filming him on their phones as he drives by, or pulling up side and honking their horn and giving a thumbs up. Yeah, he loves it. He's both of my sons are real people persons, so they're working for great companies.
That's awesome. Yeah, what a treat it is to see the boot mobile driving down the highway.
Yeah. I feel like I don't know if you can get a more Maine job than driving the LL Bean bootmobile.
It's just like what a great job, and it's funny because in one of my early books I featured the Wienermobile, and I guess I'm going to have to put the bootmobile in. There you go. In one of the next books.
There you go. And congratulations, by the way, on the forthcoming wedding. That's great news.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, we're very excited about that.
That's really nice. So, all right, big broad question right off the bat. But what got you into writing kids' books? What was the inspiration for getting into that line of work?
Well, I studied art in college, fine art actually. I majored in painting, and my thought at that time was to become a college painting professor because I could work during the winter and I'd have summers off to just paint and create. But it didn't really work out that way. I realized I had to go off to graduate school, and I must have sort of half-heartedly applied to only one school, demanding a lot of financial assistance, which I didn't get, and so I didn't get accepted in the university. So I graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. I did continue to paint. I was an oil painter and had some shows. But at the same time, I realized that a painting that would take maybe, a month to paint a picture and get maybe $500 for a painting, I could do the same thing with an illustration that I could do in 2 days and get paid the same amount. So it sort of became kind of an economical decision made for me. So I started doing illustration. I did take some illustration courses in college as well. So I was an illustrator for several years. I was a freelance illustrator. Actually, I worked for a greeting card company for a while. I worked for a magazine for a while doing illustrations. And then I went out on my own, taking any job that would come my way. But I was an illustrator before I became a writer. I was an illustrator for probably from about 1985 until about the year 2000. That's when my first book came out. Wow. So I was doing all sorts of things, mostly editorial work, magazines, newspaper. But I remember one time I was in my studio working, my studio is right here in my house. I was working on an illustration. This sort of image popped into my head of a very clear image of a man and his dog in a boat stuck in the top of a tree popped into my head. I don't know where it came from. I don't know why it popped in my head. Wow. But I was working on this other illustration. I thought that would be really fun to draw. So I grabbed a scrap of paper and quickly drew a little sketch of that, set it aside, and went back to work on the illustration. And I kept I kept sort of looking over at this sketch on my drawing table and was like, first of all, why did that pop into my head? Second of all, who is this guy? Third of all, how did he get stuck in a tree? And fourth, how is he going to get down from this tree? And so it really I sort of built a story around that. Now, at the same time, a lot of my illustrator peers that were in the same magazines as mine were switching over and doing children's book. And I've always wanted to do a children's book, but I wasn't sure if I was really going to ever get published. But I sort of developed a story around that original sketch of the guy in the boat in the tree. And I worked on it for over 9 years, but it eventually became my first book, which was called Down to the Sea with Mr. Magee. And that was published in the year 2000 by Chronicle Books out in San Francisco. It was a tough process. I didn't know what I was doing. I made all these mistakes along the way, and I had no clue about how to get a book published, but I kind of worked my way through. I just happened to meet an author illustrator at a book signing and sort of told him my situation. And he did something that nobody ever does. I don't know what he saw in me, but he gave me the name of his agent. And he said, just tell her that you met me at a book signing and that she should look at my manuscript. And I said, well, you haven't even seen it. He said, yeah, but I think you've probably got something there. So so I sent it to her, and she helped me get my first book published. And it was rejected about 6 times before Chronicle picked it up. So I was just lucky. I was in the right place at the right time, and I made the right connections, and it just worked out. After that first book came out, it did well enough that Chronicle wanted to see another book with that character. So my second book became A Camping Spree with Mr. Magee, same character, different setting. And from then on, it just kind of snowballed, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
That's a great story. And the Mr. Magee books are fabulous. Some of my daughter's favorites of your work. And I wonder, so starting with that first book, Down to the Sea with Mr. Magee, you used this rhyming couplet format that you've become known for. How did you land on that? So was it almost like that first illustration where you just started writing and it kind of came out in that format? Or did you go into it knowing, I want to use this format because I like the way it feels. I like the way it reads. And then I guess the second part of that question is, after you finished that first book and got it published, did it occur to you that this is sort of the path that I'm going to be on now? Or did you ever think of kind of deviating from that?
Well, I'm a big Dr. Seuss fan.
Yeah.
And so I've really been drawn to rhyming books. Now, on the flip side of that is publishers hate rhyming books. and they rarely will accept a rhyming manuscript. I mean, you don't see a lot of new, well-written rhyming books. I asked my editor that once, and I said, why can I still write rhyming books and you're rejecting a lot of other rhyming books? She said, because we see so much bad rhyme. And I do really work really hard on my rhyme. I get it's a whole thing where it's kind of musical, and it has to have a beat and a meter, and it has to flow, and it has to scan perfectly. If you get hung up on a line, it's not going to work. So so I work really hard to make my stories read really easily. But I also really like rhyming stories. I like reading them and I like hearing them. And as a kid, I remember my mom used to, read Dr. Seuss books to me that we'd get out of the library. And it was just a great joy to sit next to her on the couch and to just hear those whimsical rhymes. So I've always been drawn to that. So I always kind of wanted to write in that formula. It's actually much easier for me to write a rhyming book than it is a non-rhyming book. I've only done one non-rhyming book. That's Hattie and Hudson.
Okay.
And that one, that was such a slog for me. I had to write it over and over and over again. It was so hard. But the structure of rhyme, for me, it's just an easier way to write. But I also think rhyme sort of adds, obviously, kind of whimsy to a story. The Mr. Magee books are just sort of silly adventures. They don't really have any moral or any lesson to teach. It's just this guy going off, and he gets stuck somewhere and meets all this wildlife along the way. And so it's just kind of good, clean fun, for lack of a better term. So I think it just sort of adds to the humor, and the rhyme just sort of makes the story flow more. When the first book came out, I wasn't sure I was going to write another book. To answer the second part of your question, it sort of depended on how well the first book did.
Sure.
And luckily, it did well enough that the publisher asked for another one. And so I've always told first-time writers, if you can get one book published, it becomes your biggest business card, and it gets your foot in the door, and things move forward from there. So that's once that book came out, and then they wanted a second book, I knew I was on the right path.
You mentioned it being musical, and I think that's absolutely right. Obviously, Dr. Seuss is legendary, but I think in a way, and this is not intended to try to flatter you, but your rhyming is almost smarter. It needs to be, right? Because you're not just making up words. And then that sort of the musicality of the rhymes that you write paired with the amazing illustrations just creates this wonderful kind of, each book is this world that inspires imagination. So I was just thinking, anybody can create a rhyme when the second half of it is a word that is completely made up, right?
Yeah. And that bothers some people. It never really bothered me, but I've had people say that, well, that it just kind of drives them crazy when they read a Dr. Seuss book. In some cases, he used it so well. In the How the Grinch Stole Christmas, he says very nimbly, he stuffed the tree up the chimbley, which I thought I thought that was pretty brilliant.
I love that rhyme.
So he does kind of tweak things like that. But I try, when I was working on my first book, I did read a lot of Dr. Seuss books. And I remember, my wife and I would get in bed at night. She'd be reading a novel, and I'd be reading Horton Hears a Who, and we'd be studying them with the same intensity. But the problem is, when you read so many Dr. Seuss books, sometimes when it comes to writing your own story, it really sounds a lot like Dr. Seuss. And that was the case for my third book, which was called If I Built a Car. That was sort of based on a Dr. Seuss formula that he used in a lot of his books, where, it starts with a kid sort of imagining something, and it gets crazier and crazier and crazier. And then at the end, it's all been his imagination. You're back in the same place. And I really like that format. So I based the If I Built books on that formula. But my first version, I remember I read it, and I think I read it to my wife, and she goes, oh my God, that sounds just like Dr. Seuss. You got to change that around, So I had to make it my own language, and that's probably why I don't make up so many words when I'm writing a story. I just try to stick to basic language, but I also try to add some challenge words in there, which I didn't know what were. I didn't know what they were when I first started out until I met a librarian who was a friend of my neighbor's. And when my first book came out, she said, "I'm so glad you're putting challenge words in there." And I said, "Okay,
What the
I
heck's a
guess I am
challenge
too, but what are they?" And she said, "It's basically words that kids may not necessarily know. They may have to ask their parent or look things up, but it just sort of increases their vocabulary. And it doesn't dumb it down. I mean, that's the most important thing. You can't dumb things down for kids because they see right through that, and they're totally turned off by that."
That's one of the things that I was going to say about that I love about your writing is that I think the rhyme schemes are so well done. I think they're a pleasure to read. Like, I love reading your books to my kids, and there's plenty of rhyming books out there that are just so, they're very first draft is what they feel like, and they're so, like, I hate reading them. And what I was going to say was, like, I'm often sort of surprised at some of the words that you're able to kind of get into some of these. I mean, I have the Circus Ship in front of me. We just read it again tonight. It's just one of my absolute favorites, and it's a staple on our bookshelf. But I mean, you get the word bedraggled in one of these. They pulled themselves up on the shore, bedraggled, cold and beat, then staggered to the village on weary, wobbly feet. All these consonants that, like, they could be running into each other and creating a word salad in your mouth, but they don't. They just flow so nicely, and it's just such a pleasure to read. And I kind of wonder, you mentioned Nimbly and Chimbly over there from How the Grinch Stole Christmas and how much you like that. I wonder if there's a couplet of your own that you wrote that you sort of look back at as one that you're most proud of.
I can't think of anything right off the bat. I mean, I was pretty happy in the Circus Ship when I was able to rhyme rumors with bloomers.
That's a good one.
When the monkey is supposedly spotted swinging in the woman's bloomers on her clothesline. But there's a funny story about that. When I was working on that book, I sort of wanted to make it as accurate as possible. So I contacted a local marine museum, the Penobscot Marine Museum, which is just up the coast from where I live. And I asked if I could speak with the curator or the librarian, or I can't remember exactly what his title was. And I told him what I was working on, and I was wondering if he'd be willing to look at my sketches and sort of see them for authenticity. And he said, "Well, I come right through your town on my way home, so why don't I just swing by your house and we'll look at the sketches?" I said, "Fantastic." So he came by and he spent a long time, and we went through all the sketches, and it was just invaluable to me. But I had rumors and bloomers in there, and he said, he was so funny. The story is based on a true incident that took place in 1836. He said, "Well, that's not really accurate because bloomers weren't invented till like the late 1870s." And I said, "How do you know this?" And he said, he said, "Bloomers were designed so women could ride bicycles." And
wow.
And I said, "Oh, wow." I said, "So that's not really accurate." He said, "No, not technically." He said, "But it's so good, I think you ought to leave it in there." So I was like, okay.
Take a liberty with that one. You deserve it.
Exactly.
That's wild.
I wonder, Mark mentioned, and I fully agree that there's a lot of, unfortunately, really just, I don't want to disparage anybody. I won't use any names, but there's just a lot of books that have become immensely popular in the kind of pantheon of popular children's books, and they just feel poorly written or maybe a little bit lazy. And so that, all that to say that when there's work like yours or work like John Clausen, who was on our show several years ago, or Mac Barnett, who I know you've illustrated for in the past, the really good ones rise to the top. And you, I don't know, as someone who reads a lot of books to my kids, you come to really appreciate the truly good ones. And you were very inspired, obviously, by Dr. Seuss, by Robert McCloskey. But who now are the authors and illustrators that you find yourself admiring in the field of children's literature?
Oh, there's so many. I read everything from early readers to right up to YA, and there were so many. I really like the work of the Fan brothers. They're out of Canada. They're brothers that illustrate, and they've written some stories as well. Kate DiCamillo, who I've had the pleasure to illustrate her Mercy Watson books. She's a spectacular writer. I don't know how she gets her words to work so well, and her selection of words. I mean, they're deceptively simple, but the stories are so well crafted. I've got a local guy here, Steve Costanza. He does beautiful work. Charles Santoso is a friend. He's actually in Australia. He does incredible illustrations. Bob Shea, he's down in Connecticut. He's a friend. He does these really funny, whimsical stories. I mean, there are just so many, but there are so many. I mean, and I do collect a lot. Sophie Blackall is a spectacular author and illustrator. Bill Joyce does some incredibly beautiful illustrations as well. So they're almost like too many to mention, and I know I'm leaving some really important people that are very influential to me out as well.
Well, a lot for us and for our listeners to kind of go and check out. Do some Googling and find some good books to put on your kids' shelves. So your kids are now grown. I think you mentioned they're 33 and I forget 31. The other ones.
31. Yeah, I didn't say that.
Yeah. I just wonder, in what ways has your experience as a dad sort of influenced your writing? And then I guess a sort of second companion question to that question is, I just wonder, have your kids had ever been sort of a part of your creative process? I'm always curious to know if as a dad, if that's sort of like, if you were looking at these books through that lens, or if you were kind of trying to be objective or coming at it from a different perspective at all.
Well, the advantage that I had when I was first starting out is they were in the picture book audience range, age range. And my wife and I would sort of divide and conquer each night at bedtime, and one would take one kid and one would take the other kid and read a story to them. So I read a lot of picture books. And the one thing that they taught me by reading all those picture books is, if I ever wrote a children's book, to keep it short. Because they'd pick these books which were wonderfully illustrated. There was one book, I'm not going to mention the name, but it was wonderfully illustrated. But the thing was way too long, and it just took forever to get through. And maybe it was a stall tactic on their part. It probably was. But I remember, like, when they picked that book, it's like, oh, gosh, that book again? Okay. Mm-hmm. So I always decided that if I ever wrote a book, and this was way before I was writing books, I was illustrating at that time, but not even thinking about writing a book at that point. But I thought if I ever did, they would be short. So that really helped. They also helped when it came to writing my books. I mean, my first book came out in 2000, so one of my sons was 7 and 9. So they were pretty close to the age when they were still reading picture books, or we were still reading picture books to them. But when my third book came out, I remember specifically, that was If I Built a Car. I came to the breakfast table one day, and I said, they were sitting there, and I said, guys, I'm thinking of writing a book about a kid who designs this futuristic, magical car. I said, what would you put in this car if you could do? And so they just rattled off these ideas, just like crazy ideas. And I remember saying, okay, well, this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of, like, it might have a glass bottom, so it can go in the water and you can look down and you can see fish underneath the car as it's floating across the surface. And I remember I think it was my son, Ethan, he goes, why doesn't it just go underwater? It was like, oh, okay,
Mm-hmm.
So they just kind of cut through it, and they're just like giving these ideas. So I remember they really helped me with some ideas like that. And also, when that book came out, the publisher let me do something a little bit more fun. So when you open up, the opening end papers are sketches that the character, quote unquote, Jack, sketched, to come up with ideas for his car. And I could draw the cars kind of childlike, but I couldn't get the writing right. And so I asked my son Tucker, I said, "Can you write out these phrases in your handwriting?" And I used those on the end papers. So I gave him credit in the acknowledgments, like end paper hand lettering by Tucker Van Dusen.
That's awesome.
And so they really helped me along the way. And even later on, when they were like teenagers, when I'd get my advanced copies, they'd always grab a copy and they'd read it when it first came to the house. And one time, I think my son Tucker was here with a bunch of his buddies. There was like 5, teenage boys in the kitchen, and the books came out. And I said, "Hey guys, look, my new book just came out." And they all grabbed a copy. They're like, 14, 15 years old. And they sat around the kitchen table, and I wish I had taken a picture, because they're all just sitting there reading. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was Circus Ship or something like that, but they're all just studying this book. So they still read the books, but they don't participate quite as much now at this age.
Yeah, I love that. My daughters are 10 and 7, and my 7-year-old, who's in second grade, this year has been bringing home the If I Built a Car. And then a week or two later, it was the house, and then it was the school. And both my girl, I mean, even my 10-year-old, like, we sit there and we read these together, and they're both very capable readers. And so we take turns reading the pages, and I can't think of any other author who has them both so excited to read the next page. I look at them and their eyebrows are up like this. They can't believe what this young boy has designed for his school. And it just is, it's so exciting, because I think, especially with my 10-year-old, she's getting to the age where she's doing chapter books and stuff and reading on her own. But to still have books where, we can come together as a family and trade off pages, and they will both be so excited, is really something special for my wife and me.
Thank you. That's so nice of you to say. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. Yeah.
So here's a question here. I guess it's kind of two different questions. I wondered if you just had like a philosophy on writing children's books. And I guess I think about, it feels to me that, the sort of the key to writing and illustrating a story, like, it lies between somewhere like giving children enough to keep them engaged, keep them interested, and yet leaving space for their imaginations to sort of take hold, or for allowing the stoking of like their imagination. It feels like there's something in there. And I don't know. I just wonder what your feeling is on that. And, if you sort of have a philosophy when it comes to sitting down and crafting a story for children.
Well, what I try to do when I write a book is there are a couple of things that I try to keep in mind. First of all, is this a book I would have liked when I was 6 years old? Because I have a very vivid memory of my childhood and the books I liked and the things that interested me. And someone once told me, "You're never going to go wrong writing a book about dinosaurs," because kids are always going to like a dinosaur, So
that's funny.
So so I try to keep in mind, when I'm writing a book, is this a book I would have liked when I was 6 years old? I also try to show the reader something they've never seen before, or take them someplace they've never been before. So you've never seen a giant lake monster in a lake in Maine. You've never seen a car fly over you when you're sitting in an inner tube on the lake, or had a robot drive a car around the neighborhood. So I try to show them, things like that. The If I Built books, you talked about using your imagination and creativity. Those books are all about using your imagination. And I can't tell you how many times I've received packages from schools that I've just visited, where they will take a topic. This happened when for If I Built a School, I received several copies of If I Built a School by all these school kids before I even thought of writing the book myself. So that was really inspired by kids for me to write that story. But I also think one thing that makes a children's book really successful is rereadability. By that, I mean, is this a book that someone's going to want to read over and over again? Because I think that's the key to a successful children's book. There are very few books where I go, okay, this one I'm going to read over and over and over again, and I'm going to refer to. So that's, I think, a key to makes a successful children's book. And one of the things that probably my most successful book is The Circus Ship, like you mentioned, Mark. And I think that one of the keys that book is successful is it works on so many different levels. I've had so many people buy that book as baby gifts, baby shower gifts. And even little kids like the animals. They like seeing the animals and the bright colors. But then as they get older, they realize it's really a story about community and, working together, cooperating, sort of fighting, against negative forces, greedy circus bosses and things like that. But also that book has all the elements that I think make a good children's book. It's a little scary in places. It's funny in places. It's kind of sad and heartwarming, it's kind of touching. So there's also all those emotions are wrapped into one story. And if you can do that, I think you got a winner.
Yeah. Yeah. You obviously do a lot of school visits and present and read to kids and have done this for years. Is there anything, maybe any theme or any question that has sort of consistently surprised you that comes up in these school visits?
Well, they always want to know how old I am. And then sometimes kids say, do you make a lot of money? And then the teachers say, that's not an appropriate question. But I always have to kind of laugh. But there were a couple of questions that I got. This was a while back, but I was at a school. And a lot of kids, one of the questions a kid asks me almost every time is, what's your favorite book that you've written and illustrated? I mean, I get that a lot. But this kid turned around and he goes, what's your least favorite book that you've written and illustrated? It was like, wow.
That's a great question,
there we
actually.
go.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Yeah. And I do have some that I like. Obviously, I like some better than others. But that kind of set me back a little bit. It was like, yeah, that is a good question. But, kids... I'll go to a school visit and I'll expect the typical questions like, what's your favorite book? But then sometimes I get zingers like that. But the thing that I take most from a school visit, to see a kid with all the distractions they have going on in their life, all the screens vying for their attention, to see them get excited about a book in their hands and their ownership of that book. I mean, that's just the best, because it's like, it's so basic. I mean, the technology is so big. They have to turn pages to read this thing. And they get so excited to have their own book, and to flip through, look at the details and the illustrations. So that keeps me in business. It keeps me coming back to writing and illustrating books, because that's really why I do it.
Well, I will say, and like I said, tonight, for bedtime, we read through the Circus Ship. And my kids are now they're finally at an age where they're sort of learning to read and doing a really good job. And for the first time ever, I handed the book over to one of my sons and he read it to me, which was really cool in our little relationship, that it's come full circle now that he can sort of read. And it is really wonderful to see, two funny anecdotes I'll tell you, but he got to one of the pages in there. I think it was when, I think it might've been when all the animals are in the morning, they're reaching the shore, and he stopped reading. And I was like, okay, hey buddy, there's words on that page. He goes, I know, I just want to look at this page for a little while. And it's like, that's wonderful. Like he just wants to live on that page for a little bit. And it's just like, it's so easy for me as a, 40 something year old, like adult, to just be like, yeah, get to the next thing, buddy. And it's like, how beautiful is that to just, I just want to stare at this page for a little longer.
That's so great. That's such a nice,
yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It was really wonderful. The other thing was that I asked him, I have two sons. One of them falls asleep in an instant, so he was out already, but my other one was still awake. And I said, I'm meeting with this guy tonight. I said, do you have any questions that you want me to ask him? And he didn't have any questions, but he said that he wanted me to tell you that he really loves the fact that you didn't forget about any of the animals throughout this book. And I thought that was really sweet.
That is really sweet.
Because they go through something, and they really go through something in the book, right? Like they're all lost at sea for a little bit, and then they gotta figure out how to live on this. I thought that was really
That's
sweet.
funny that he picked. It's funny that he picked that up, because when I was doing that book, I wanted each animal to have some sort of recognition in the book. When they're, there's an ostrich in the outhouse, there's a hippo in the spring, they get called out there. or when the alligators on the wood pile, or the monkeys and the ladies' bloomers. So they get called out there. And then, of course, at the end, when all the animals are hiding, they all get called out there as well. So, and the tiger obviously is kind of the hero of the book. But but that's really intuitive. That's awesome. I really love that. Yeah.
He's of my two kids. I kind of refer to him as being like, he's like the deep thinker.
Yeah.
You know, he's the one who kind of contemplates.
And I love the fact that he stopped and he looked at that picture, because when I was a kid, Robert McCloskey I was a huge Robert McCloskey fan. And one book in particular really stood out. It was called One Morning in Maine. And there was one specific picture in that book that I can look at, and I just want to stop and I want to look at it. And when I was a kid, I just remember very clearly that I just wanted to live there. It's the picture where Sal is walking across she's going down to meet her father, who's clamming down the beach, and she's walking across this field, and the house is in the background. You see the rocks and the shore, and she's waving up to the osprey flying over to the nest. And I just I want to be in there. I want to be, I want to go down and see Dad on the beach too. It was just so magical. It just had such a great sense of space and place. And I just love that.
Well, so Chris, I wonder what's next for you. Do you have any new books like on the horizon, or you have new ideas? Like what's next in your life?
So I spent like the last 2 years working on a book. It was a slog, but I finally finished it just a few weeks ago, shipped it off. The publisher doesn't want me to talk too much about it. They don't want me to give away any secrets, but I can tell you that it's another book in the If I Built series. It's longer than the previous books. And Jack, the boy in the book, is thinking even bigger this time. So the illustrations took me forever. The detail is like over the top. There's so much to look at. I think my wife is in the other room. She says it's insane. In fact, I said that several times when I was working on this book. It's like, this is it. Why am I doing this to myself? This is insane. Why? But it's going to be kind of maybe one of my pinnacles. So, and it's going to come out next year, September 30th, 2025. And then after that, I've sketched out and written another Mr. Magee story. So I'm hoping to bring him back, because it's been a while since the last one was learning to ski with Mr. Magee. So this time he goes hiking, and of course something terrible happens, and but they all end up back home safe and sound. So I'm really looking forward to bringing him back and getting back to the world of Mr. Magee. That'll be fun.
Well, we can't wait for that. On behalf of our podcast, I just want to say thank you for your entire catalog of work that's made such an impact on Mark's family and my family, and I'm sure the families of so many of our listeners. It's been a total delight to chat with you. Moms and dads listening, I will direct you to chrisvandusen.com, where I'm sure as details start to emerge about new projects, I'm sure you'll be able to learn about them there. You can also browse and buy a lot of Chris's original artwork, and there are links to purchase all of the books there as well. Chris will make sure to link to your website and your social media and everything else, Chris Van Dusen, in our episode notes. But again, thank you so much for making the time, especially after a long day of a school visit, to join us for this chat.
Well, thank you guys so much. I really, really appreciate it. This was a really fun conversation for me. And so I really appreciate you inviting me on. I think that's great. And just to be clear, I do have an Instagram page. It's Chris Van Dusen Books, because there's another Chris Van Dusen that did the Bridgerton series, and that's a little different from what I do. So
a little more risque, yeah.
You might want to stay with Chris Van Dusen Books. And I'm going to be putting some hints and sort of previewing that next If I Built book over the next few months. So teasers, as they say. So those will be coming too. But thank you guys. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you having me on, and it was a good conversation.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. Take care.
I have one thing that I would like to say to you and to our listeners.
What's that?
I had the absolute amazing and wonderful fortune of meeting for the first time in person one of our previous guests, he was on the show. I almost fell out of my chair when I realized how long ago it was, but we interviewed a long time ago the wonderful and soulful and amazing singer Martin Sexton. Mm-hmm. Go back and listen to the story, but it was for me it was like I've been a fan since at least 1998, and my feelings for him have only grown stronger over time.
He's got some great holiday music. That's a great place to start if you're just.
He's got a great album called Camp Holiday. It's great. Check it out. But he did a show in Rochester, New Hampshire. And I've seen this guy probably 25 times live over the years. So Jamie and I hung out afterwards. We met him. And Jamie very quickly was like, "Hey, Marty, you were on his podcast a few years ago called Modern Dadhood." Well, I was going to say something to him. I was going to work, but I was going to work it in tactfully. And Jamie she just went right to it, which is one of the things I love about her. And I kid you not, he as soon as he hears Modern Dadhood, his head spins around and looks at me and he goes, that was you? And I was like, yeah. I was like, he's like, I had such a great time being on that show. I love talking with you guys. I think about my time on that show. And I was like, I can't even tell you what that means to me, dude. Like, the fact that he remembered it at all, but also has like a fond memory of it. Oh, dude.
Stand-up guy as well.
Totally stand-up, dude. And you know what he did that night? The show was he played our theme song. All he did was play the episode.
He just played it
to a crowd of people. No, he played the Beatles album Abbey Road from cover to cover.
Wow.
This is what he did. He played and sang that, told some little anecdotes and stories along the way. It was fantastic. It was so great. Well, there you go.
Hey, great episode, Mark.
I think so too, man.
All right, let's close it out. Let's close it out. I'm gonna do it fast this time. You just jump in wherever you see fit. If I even leave you a gap to jump in,
I'm gonna time you.
Moms and dads listening, thank you so much for choosing Modern Dadhood.
Much.
Mark, I can't do it if you're gonna interrupt like that.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I meant to add color, but you know what? It came across like an interruption. Start again.
You can find every episode of Modern Dadhood on our website.
Every single one of them. Sorry, go ahead.
moderndadhood.com or anywhere you're listening to your podcasts, anywhere you choose to listen to your podcasts, including wherever you're listening right now.
Apple Podcasts.
Spotify.
Hark Audio.
Dusen
Casts.
Pocket Casts. Please subscribe, leave us a rating and a review, all that good stuff. Tell a friend about Modern Dadhood when you're at your holiday parties this weekend and next weekend. And thank you to Casper Baby Pants and Spencer Albee for the music in the podcast. Thank you so much to our new friend, Chris Van Dusen, who was fabulous to talk to. Find links to everything about him in the episode notes. Happy holidays to you and yours.
Enjoy the time off from work.
And Mark, why don't you deliver the final thank you of this episode?
I will.
To our listeners.
I'm going to do it. Can you insert some more jingle bells at this time? Thank you for listening.